Hello, I'm the Culture Genie. The topic of today is going to be a topic very relevant to our times right now. How nuclear bombs have affected our history. Our story begins in August 1945. The United States has just detonated 2 nuclear weapons over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th and 9th of August respectively, causing enormous amounts of suffering and causing the death of more than 100,000 Japanese and possibly even so many as over 200,000 casualties. These were mostly civilians who were living their lives unaware that they would be the demonstration for the most powerful bombs ever created until then, as the cities had been purposefully spared the devastation of American air raids before in order to make this demonstration in a real fire scenario.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
It was a terror never before seen in the history of humanity. As said, the demonstration was devastating, but it was successful in demonstrating the devastating, terrible power of nuclear weapons, as Japan surrendered on the 15th of August unconditionally. And as the Second World War was coming to an end, the Cold War began in earnest as the Soviet Union created its satellite states in the eastern part of Europe, and on the 29th of August 1949, the Soviet Union conducted its first nuclear test, codenamed RDS-1, at the Semipalatinsk test site in modern-day Kazakhstan. From there on out, the world would be on the edge of mutual annihilation, as both the Soviet Union and the USA with its allies in NATO would begin an arms race by stockpiling nuclear weapons of ever greater power. This led into the creation of the acronym M.A.D, Mutually Assured Destruction, as if any side would try to destroy the other, then it would be destroyed in turn, due to nuclear retaliation. By the mid-1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear power to obliterate each other many times over. Both sides developed a capability also to launch a devastating attack, even after sustaining a full frontal assault from the other side with nuclear weapons. This policy became known, as I said before, as mutually assured destruction. Both sides knew that any attack upon the other would be devastating to themselves, thus in theory restraining them from attacking each other. This was in the background of the entire Cold War until the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s. And the idea of M.A.D, of mutually assured destruction, actually worked, even if there existed some close calls such as the Korean War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where it could have ended in Armageddon. However, the threat of the nuclear bomb hindered the war between the United States and the Soviet Union from ever getting hot on a large scale. So what is maybe the most terrible, most destructive instrument of war ever created in the history of mankind might be the greatest instrument of peace ever, as the Cold War never turned hot on a large scale and was only limited to a couple of proxy conflicts between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, as for the modern day, nuclear weapons is probably one of the reasons as to why the Russian-Ukraine conflict war has probably not escalated to a true world war. The threat of Putin unleashing the bombs now in modern times is what keeps other powers away from sending troops directly and further escalating the situation into becoming a much larger war. Everybody is afraid of nukes, and for good reasons, and afraid that things will escalate to the use of them. If not for nukes, the Ukraine conflict or war would have probably become much larger and evolved into something similar to the Crimean War of 1854 where most of Europe was involved in a war in Crimea against the Russian Empire with troops on the ground. However, even despite the non-involvement of direct troops, the various powers of Europe and the United States are sending war material to Ukraine, which could escalate the situation. They are also doing heavy sanctions on Russia, which could lead into further escalations. Though I dislike comparisons to World War II and Putin being some sort of new Hitler, it is still important to know that post-World War I Germany felt that they were treated very poorly and oppressed by the victors of World War I. Perhaps Putin still carries a similar mentality, with the burden of the capitulation of the Soviet Union in the 90s. This on top of being cut off from the monetary system and fighting in a war where his enemies are supplied by weapons provided by the Western powers such as the USA and various European countries, worries me that if it goes further and Russia's ship starts to really sink, he will take us all down with him. I hope I'm wrong here. If you look at recent geopolitics, it has been itching closer and closer to the edge, and the situation has begun to corner Russia in a way. And sometimes cornering a bear, even a rapacious bear, could be the worst thing to do, as it will lash out in fear and desperation. People ought to be aware that M.A.D, as in mutually assured destruction, is still a thing in the modern day. Hopefully, Putin is not mad, though the situation is otherwise mad.
Certainly will be mad if this does not de-escalate.
I thank you for listening to this rather brief video about living in the shadow of the atomic bomb. I made it due to the current events and the fact that I think that a lot of people do not really realize the danger we are currently in with Russia and their atomic arsenal, and that we might be on the brink of the annihilation of the world as we know it. Usually I would say push the like button and subscribe, but it feels wholly inappropriate in this situation. If any of my viewers feel fear for the future, you might give a comment in the comment section and we could discuss it.